This morning, the U.S. national security apparatus didn't learn about a major geopolitical shift through the Five Eyes intelligence network or classified diplomatic cables. They learned about it the same way you did, from a Reuters wire alert. By the time officials in Washington could verify the details, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban and Canada's Representative Mark Carney were already sealing a $146 billion comprehensive partnership in Budapest. This is not a routine trade story. It is a profound intelligence and strategic failure. It marks the moment that the last major European ally of the current U.S. administration, a leader who publicly championed Donald Trump at CPAC and within EU summits, decided that Canadian economic reliability was finally worth more than American political loyalty, a relationship defined by numbers. To understand why this is a structural shift, we have to look at the deal itself. This 15-year framework isn't just symbolic. It effectively unplugs Hungary from its most critical dependencies. Energy, a $45 billion commitment for Canadian liquefied natural gas (LNG), aimed at replacing the 65% of Hungary's natural gas currently sourced from Russia. Critical minerals, a $32 billion supply deal for nickel, cobalt, and lithium, designed to anchor Hungary's massive electric vehicle battery industry away from Chinese-controlled supply chains. Nuclear, an $18 billion pivot to Canadian CANDU reactor technology, formally ending Hungary's reliance on Russian nuclear services. For 8 months, these negotiations were conducted via back channels in Zurich, Singapore, and Abu Dhabi, utilizing commercial law firms to bypass traditional diplomatic radar. The turning point: why did it happen? According to 2 officials involved in the final deliberations, the catalyst was the overnight buyer pivot, an 8-hour win where Canada demonstrated its ability to replace American agricultural buyers entirely. It forced a brutal calculation inside Budapest. One senior economic advisor put it bluntly: if Canada can replace American buyers in 18 hours, they can replace American allies in 18 months. We should be the first to arrive, not the last. That detail tells you everything about the current state of trust. When your most vocal ally concludes that your trade policies are too volatile to sustain, they don't just complain. They hedge. And as we are seeing tonight, they are not hedging alone. The shockwaves of the Budapest Agreement are still rippling through the corridors of power. But if we move past the initial tactical surprise, the strategic logic becomes cold, hard, and undeniably calculated. We aren't just looking at a trade deal. We are witnessing a systemic decoupling. The fundamental tension here, the one that has Washington reeling, is the collapse of the security for trade paradigm. For 70 years, the transatlantic alliance functioned on a simple, unspoken assumption. The United States provided the security umbrella, and, in exchange, European partners maintained economic alignment with American interests. The $146 billion agreement signed in Budapest obliterates that assumption. Consider the sheer scale of the energy pivot. With a $45 billion commitment for Canadian LNG, Hungary is essentially purchasing 15 years of sovereign energy security. That isn't just a commercial contract. It is a geopolitical insurance policy. By fixing the price and securing long-term supply, Hungary has effectively insulated itself from the kind of price volatility that characterized American LNG shipments over the last 18 months. Volatility that many in Budapest viewed not as market noise, but as deliberate economic leverage. When an official in the Hungarian Ministry of Trade noted, "Stability is a commodity the Americans no longer offer at a price we can afford," they weren't just talking about dollars. They were talking about the political cost of being tethered to a partner that uses energy export permits as a bargaining chip in domestic political disputes. The critical minerals sector provides an even clearer lens into the shifting power dynamics. Hungary currently serves as the primary hub for European electric vehicle battery manufacturing. For years, the supply chain for these factories was a fragile web of Chinese-controlled rare earths and Russian-origin inputs. The new Canadian agreement provides a $32 billion, legally secure, and democratically aligned alternative. That detail tells you exactly what the long-term play is. By building a sovereign supply chain with Canada, Hungary is making itself the indispensable backbone of European industrial strategy. They are moving away from the precarious position of a vulnerable dependent and toward the role of a strategic anchor for European manufacturing. The nuclear component, an $18 billion transition from Russian Rosatom technology to Canadian CANDU systems, is perhaps the most audacious move. It is a fundamental rewriting of Eastern Europe's energy DNA. By choosing Canadian technology, Hungary is explicitly rejecting the dependency model that tied them to Moscow, while simultaneously bypassing the American nuclear export regime that had become increasingly bogged down in regulatory hurdles and political conditions. Mark Carney's statement, "When your closest ally chooses your adversary, the problem isn't the ally," serves as the guiding principle of this new era. It is a signal to every other European capital that the cost of loyalty has become too high. When a leader like Orban, someone who bet his entire domestic political capital on the success of the Trump administration, concludes that the partnership is no longer viable, it signals to every other head of state in Europe that the status quo is not just crumbling, it's being abandoned. The intelligence failure that blinded Washington to these 8 months of negotiations is the final piece of the puzzle. The fact that Hungarian officials utilized commercial law firms and sovereign wealth funds to conduct these talks in Zurich, Singapore, and Abu Dhabi shows a level of operational sophistication that suggests they weren't just avoiding scrutiny. They were operating under the assumption that the American system was incapable of processing this kind of decentralized defection. We are now looking at a cascading effect that no amount of diplomatic damage control can reverse. Poland, the Czech Republic, and the Baltic states aren't just watching. They are already in the room with Canadian negotiators. As Warren Buffett noted, each defection lowers the barrier for the next. The question that remains, and the one that will define the next 6 months of global instability, is simple. If the largest bilateral deal in Hungarian history can be negotiated in total darkness, what is currently being signed in the shadows by your other closest allies? The Hungarian-Canadian partnership represents far more than a bilateral trade agreement. It is the definitive signal that the post-World War II architecture of American-led alliances has officially entered a terminal phase of obsolescence. By replacing American economic inputs with Canadian sovereign guarantees, Budapest has mapped the blueprint for an entire continent seeking to exit the subordination for security model. For the United States, this is not a temporary diplomatic rift. It is a structural loss of leverage. The Washington-centric system relied on the belief that allies had nowhere else to turn for critical energy, defense, and industrial supply. That belief has been dismantled. For Canada, this reorientation session marks a historic emergence as a democratic, non-hegemonic alternative to the United States. Ottawa has successfully positioned itself as a reliable partner that offers stability without the volatile demand for political fealty that now characterizes American diplomacy. For Europe, the path is now clear. The Hungarian deal serves as a proven template for national survival in an era of American transactionalism. Countries like Poland, the Czech Republic, and the Baltic states are already moving to replicate the Budapest model because they have witnessed firsthand that defection from the American sphere is not only possible, it is increasingly profitable and strategically necessary. For other emerging powers like India, the lesson is even more stark. When the world's most powerful nation treats its closest partners as expendable, those partners will inevitably prioritize their own sovereignty over the stability of the alliance. The era of unquestioning transatlantic alignment is over, replaced by a fluid, interest-driven landscape where trust is indexed to economic reliability rather than historical sentiment. The strategic shift is now irreversible. We're watching the transition from a monolithic American-led order to a fragmented global system where regional actors seek sovereign autonomy by anchoring their economies to stable, mid-sized powers that operate outside the gravitational pull of Washington's current political demands. The intelligence failure that allowed this to happen was not a simple oversight. It was an analytical refusal to accept that the era of American primacy had already ended. The single most important takeaway is this: sovereignty has replaced loyalty as the primary currency of international relations. The Hungary-Canada deal did not create this reality. It merely confirmed that when a hegemon loses its credibility, the alliance dissolves not with a bang, but with the quiet, methodical signing of contracts elsewhere. The next 6 months will be defined by a calico of independence as the remaining allies in Europe, and beyond conclude that for their own national interests, the best way to secure their future is to detach from a failing status quo. The structure of the 21st century is being written in Budapest, and it is being written without Washington.